Welcome back to the AI Value Paradox podcast. Today we are looking directly at the silent killer of corporate velocity, the post-meeting execution vacuum. The year is 2026, and while organizations blindly pour capital into autonomous agents, the C-suite is facing a harsh truth. Airdropping sophisticated intelligence into rigid corporate structures yields nothing but friction. At Kategos, we know that true value is never built on raw technology, it is built on human adoption. To shift from superficial experimentation to bottom-line impact, leaders must stop treating AIs as rigid software and start managing it as a human-adjacent collaborator. Today, we are heading into the engine room to unpack the massive operational transition from legacy information systems to new intent technology and how to establish the precise cultural guardrails required to let AI execute safely at scale. Joining the conversation to deliver the blueprint is Artem, the founder and chief product officer at Assembly AI. Let's dive in.
Welcome back to AI Value Paradox. I'm your host, Puneet. We've all been there. A 1 hour meeting wrap, suddenly you hit with a mountain of follow-up tasks, manual summaries, lost context, and today's guest saw this problem coming long before AI became a tech buzzword. The question is whether these tools are delivering on their promise. I'm down with a thinker, a tech entrepreneur, Artem Koren. He's the founder and chief product officer at Assembly AI, an industry leader in transforming meeting data into professional execution. But Artem's background goes way beyond traditional tech leadership. He's a Columbia trained computer scientist, a New York Stern MBA graduate, a competitive chess player, and author of Untethered, a book exploring human nature, instinct, and reason. He brings a unique, deeply psychological and philosophical lens to the way humans and AI can work symbiotically. Arden, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So, Arden, we are going to talk about building a company before the market was ready. The mechanics of meeting intelligence where human judgment meets AI execution. What made you think about this problem?
A big part of it was that I spent a good number of years in management consulting. And as a project lead in management consulting, most of your time is spent in meetings. It's meetings to meetings to meetings, and that's what really drives progress. And when I left that domain and I got together with my co-founder, Gil McClef, we thought, how valuable would it be if technology was able to understand what actually happens in those meetings and then be able to do something about that understanding? That's where the idea for Assembly was born. And the rest is history. We started before AI was cool in 2019, but we were always an AI forward company. And we had a strong belief that the progression curve was very sharp for AI, and that was the right time to start developing these nascent technologies, even though I think it was pretty early for the rest of the market.
This is funny that 2019, that was way before ChatGPT was even born, right? What about how did you perceive the speech recognition before LLMs went mainstream, which made today's or Assembly story even more compelling because you didn't have the resources that we have today?
There are a few pieces you need to work well in order for this kind of technology to work and to deliver what it's supposed to. The first piece is to be able to enter your workflow naturally. We knew that if there was a complicated or an additional component that you would need, and or if you would need to change the way you do things significantly, it would never get adopted. So the first piece is to be able to join you in meetings where you're at, whether that's an online meeting or an offline meeting or a phone or what have you. So that's the first complicated piece. The second complicated piece is what you mentioned. It's understanding what's actually said in the conversation. And so that's broadly called ASR, or at least it used to be. It's automatic speech recognition. But that term hides inside of it a lot of complexity. but ultimately it's having some kind of vocal data that you turn into legible digital data that people and computers can understand. And then the third piece is the analytics piece. It's to be able to analyze conversations in a useful way and be able to extract useful things from them and then follow on with useful artifacts from those conversations. So when we set out, we didn't realize it immediately, but we quickly realized that we needed those three pieces. And as it turned out, none of those three pieces really existed in the world yet. So the first piece I knew didn't exist, and we would need to be innovative in how we handled it. The second piece, the ASR piece, the speech recognition, I was surprised because there were a number of big name companies like Google and Microsoft who offered speech to text. But when you start to use it in practice, you realize that the quality of that speech to text back in that day was very poor, so poor that
Hmm.
it wasn't really usable by a person on a day-to-day basis. It was poor in that it whatever did exist primarily existed for English, and it was poor in that if there was more than one person talking, you were completely screwed because there was no great solutions for what's called diarization, which is splitting up who said what. And that was a big hill we had to climb. And then the analytics piece, we knew that was brand new, but that's the piece that we were most excited about. And we felt strongest that there was enough technology concentration or critical mass to be able to do good text based analytics for it to be useful. Things like summarizing, extracting tasks, and things like that. So those are the three pieces we had to solve. And the second piece was kind of a downer because we were hoping that we would just plug into whatever Google speech to text and go, and that just ended up not being the case.
No, 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 absolutely not. So, our series is AI Value Paradox, and we are obviously focused on how the current C suite is looking to drive value out of these productivity tools, including Assembly AI, which is not just a note taker, it's more than a note taker. So, for most of the C suite, AI is not just that the tool is weak, but the application may not be done right. So, where do you see the cracks in the enterprise where adoption is there, but maybe the outcomes aren't?
So lots of cracks, but let me hit on some of the majors. I've been on very large scale engagements in leadership positions at Fortune 500 companies. And that gives me some perspective to talk about these kinds of things. I've been in the trenches, I've been in team leadership and group leadership and division leadership roles where the goal was to implement certain sets of capabilities in enterprise size organizations. So people, process, tools was the classic trio. And I spent a lot of time doing those kinds of things. So I can understand where the cracks happen, or at least that experience helps me understand this. I think the first crack is this idea that we need to apply AI. I think that's a great slogan, but translating that into what you actually are trying to achieve is a multi-phased process. And if you try to just hop from we need to apply AI to let's drop AI into the enterprise, whatever that means, you're gonna get what you define. I like to say the what, the why, the what, and the how. If you don't define those things well in that progression, you're going to fall flat on your face at some point. And I think so that's the first thing. I think it's great to have a focus on becoming more AI enabled as an organization. I think that's great, but that's a very, very tippity tip starting point. And then there's a lot of work that needs to happen before you say, okay, here's the technology, here's how it plugs into our process, and here's how it delivers on our value. So that's the first thing. I think there has to be a process that goes from I want AI to AI is delivering a result for me that I couldn't achieve without it. And there's a you have to follow that as an organization or a consulting organization can help you do that, but it's a tedious process that cannot be skipped. So I think that's the first thing. It's kind of a boring, annoying answer, maybe a little bit of a consulting answer, but it's true. The second piece is on the technology side itself, a lot of enterprise products today are oriented around the concept of agentic. And I think that enterprises very naturally gravitate to agentic type deployments. So many, what I call many enterprise forward products are not point solutions. They're not, oh, we'll help your designer design better, or we'll help your marketer campaign better. They're broader because enterprise like big scale things that fits well into their architecture maps, and they want to have something that's high impact, large scale, and so agentic comes with that promise. The problem with agentic, it's there's so many bits and pieces about contextualizing the agentic work, guardrailing the agentic work. You really need to hold your agentic technology by the hand for a long time to make it useful and also to make it not break things. And I just saw a post literally today from one of the leaders in Palantir that said something equivalent of AI is failing in enterprise and we're not allowed to talk about it. I think this idea that you can drop agentic technology into an environment and just have it be productive is the same as saying you can take people off the street. Let's say they're Ivy League people. Sure, fine. Take Ivy League people off the street, airdrop them into your organization, and then come back a month later and expect $1 billion. That's not how things work, right? You need to engender these people into your culture, engender these people into your process, engender these people into your tool set up some flows, set up some checkpoints, set up some metrics and goals, monitor. These people are going to make mistakes. You have to correct. You have to make sure the corrections stick. The technology, foundational technology for agentic is evolving constantly. Each of those evolutions comes with pros as well as bugs. And so it's, again, a much more of a handheld process to make scaled agentic AI work in an enterprise organization than I think leadership gives credit for today. It's not a drop and go, right? With pointed tools, like there's a tool that's AI driven that specifically helps a designer design a certain kind of thing. Those tools don't need so much hand holding. They kind of come with magic out of the box. They're pointed solutions. Sure, they're not going to transform your enterprise, but they will add value fairly quickly to a narrow set of your resource layer. And so I think as leaders, I don't want to overgeneralize, but you have to make a decision whether you're looking for something to deliver value near term. In that case, you're looking at pointed solutions with AI. Or if you're looking long term, you need to be looking really long term over the period of years, really years. Think about it. If you were to stand up a new division in your enterprise, manned by completely new people, doing completely new kind of business work, with new processes, with new segments of your cohorts of your customers, how long would it take for that division to be productive and ultimately income generating? That's a multi-year adventure. That's not something you can expect in a few months. And so this idea that AI is just like a tool, even if it's agentic, even if it's what, that's a false idea, because the way agentic AI works is much closer to how people work than how classic or legacy software technology works.
That is brilliantly put. Executives today, they seem to be caught between the two extreme beliefs about AI. One hand, they fear AI will go rogue and pose a risk. And the other side, which you just mentioned, they think AI is some pixie dust, and then you just put and it's going to 10x their productivity and reduce their headcount. How true is that?
I think it's true over the long term, right? It's not a pixie dust that you spray and then tomorrow you wake up with 10x. That's not it. The caveat I'll say, and I'll kind of just repeat what I said earlier, is that there are pointed products that are specialized to do one specific type of activity for one specific kind of user, and they do that 10x better than the legacy products used to do. This is true. And but that's not just spraying, right? That's bringing in a tool that's AI powered, that's very use case focused, And that tool can quickly modernize a certain part of a certain process in a certain workflow. Maybe I know, like, top of mind for me is all the new designer tools that are out there that are AI powered. My designer is having a field day in our company. She's so much more empowered, but these tools they do a very particular thing. Like, there's one AI tool that's very good for like 3D thing generation. And from day one, she's super powered with that tool. But that's very different than just bringing, like you said, sprinkling AI across your org and expecting magic to happen.
Right. And you're specifically talking about one tool, but let's say the agentic adoption that we're talking about today and how agentic AI is really going to reshape the enterprise in total. How do you see that AI and humans will work together and convert intent into outcomes? I believe we had a conversation previously where you were talking about intent into outcomes. How do you see that? And I would like for you to just elaborate that for our users.
I think that's a fantastic idea that will be very, very powerful over the next few years. And let's recap some of that conversation. My perspective is that there are three, call it, ingredients that you need to put together when it comes to agentic AI solutions. So the first ingredient you need to think about is the context. So in order for agentic AI to work well, it needs deep context. So it needs to know what's going on. It also needs to know what's been going on. So it needs good, well-structured, clean memory of your organization, and it also needs a clean current state. And if you think about it, as a person working in a company, that's what you have. That also determines how well you work. If you're not aware of things that are going on that are adjacent to the work you're doing, you're not going to be successful. You're going to start stepping on toes. You're going to go counter strategy on things. You're going to create a solution that undercut someone else's architecture. So this awareness of correct current state is very important. And also the background, why certain things were done, what already happened, what decisions were made, what roadmaps exist, like all the history. So the context is critically important, and you need to be able to provide access to this context to your agentic solution. The second piece you mentioned is intent. And I think that's maybe the most magical thing about AI class of technology, which is, rather than information technology that we used in the past that's legacy, I think the whole field of technology is still IT, but it's a different IT. It's coming from information technology into intent technology. And what does that mean? So before, you had to work with information. You had informations and functions that convert that information to something else. You had a list of contacts, you use a CRM, it converts it into a very structured Rolodex that now you can query or analyze or visualize. Or, I don't know, you had a project plan with tasks, and you have a project management system. You have your Monday or your Asana, and it takes all of that data and converts it into a structured set of tasks with dependencies and timelines, and suddenly you can analyze that and visualize that. So it was literally information technology. It was information plus function, and the function gives you an outcome. AI enables you to have what I call intent technology, which is, don't worry about what the data is, just make sure that there's access to it. That's the context piece we just spoke about. But be very clear about your intent. What is important to accomplish? And then let AI cook. So if you give AI the full context, if you give it a clear intent, the AI will produce something very good for you. Caveat, 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 but will produce something very good for you on the other end. And I think the third piece that is also important is the tooling in your environment. So context is good, but there's workflows and tooling in every significant environment. And AI should be skilled in a literal sense. There is such a concept as agentic skills. It should be skilled to use that tooling properly, whether that be workflows that you have deployed in N8N, or whether that be, certain custom tools and systems you've built for dashboards and operations and management. It has to be skilled at engaging with the tools that your people use. And I'll keep coming back to this idea that your people, you as a resource, because as agentic works much more similarly to how a person works than how a software works. And so if you combine context
Absolutely.
with tool access, with clear intent, you're going to get a phenomenal result, often better than a person could do. And if I could give you an example that's very concrete of how this new IT is different from the old IT. So let's say you want to make a presentation, a PowerPoint. So in your old AT, what did you have to do? You had to first start, okay, what am I trying to do with this PowerPoint? What information should I include? How should I structure the slides? How many slides do I need? What should be on the slides? How do I lay out the slides? Oh, I don't know how to lay out slides. Okay, let's engage the design team, lay out the slides. What branding should be there? Okay, it comes back. Now I need to do some research, get some numbers together, make sure everything is there. And then I need to apply all of that I just thought of through a tool called PowerPoint or whatever presentation tool you use, usually PowerPoint, to be fair. And I have to be a pretty good PowerPoint user. I have to have pretty deep PowerPoint skills to now implement those slides in PowerPoint. It's not an exciting thing to do. Maybe there's a few people that love making PowerPoints. God bless. But when I did it many, many times, that wasn't the most exciting part of my day, but I had to get pretty good at PowerPoint. I knew all the different alignments, all the different rotations, all the different macros, right? And then I could get a nice PowerPoint going. So I had to think a lot, I had to research a lot, I had to engage with visual people because I'm not good at design. I had to bring that all back, and then I had to employ my skill in PowerPoint to actually make the presentation happen. And no guarantee that that was going to be like perfect, but I tried. Now, compare that to a workflow of a modern tool that's specialized in creating business PowerPoints from your data, like an agent that's specialized with doing that. Okay, make sure your agent is contexted in, has access to the web, to all the documentation it might need to do the research it needs to do. So make sure it's connected to the context. Next, be very clear with your intent. So what are you trying to accomplish with this PowerPoint? That piece is similar from the original. And so let's say, my intent is I want this customer to buy my product, this particular customer to buy my product. And then you hit go. There's nothing else for you to do. The agent will pick up your intent. It will figure out what kind of research it needs to do. It will perform the research. It will compile the research base. It will plan out the slides that would create the most impactful presentation for your goal. It will copyright the content for those slides that is very specific to this customer, right? So rather than saying, this solution will bring your staff 10% ROI, it can say it will bring, because you're a legal company, this solution will save you 10% of the time on your briefs and on your legal material, this, because it's going to make it very contexted into the client that you're trying to sell to. And it's also going to do the visual, and it's going to do a beautiful job of the visual. It has skills on how to do layouts and slides and things like that. And in the end, once you've contexted it and gave it an intent, it's going to be able to produce for you a beautiful, complete PowerPoint deck. Okay, you go in, you say, oh, actually, I think I just want to tweak this language here. Or, you know what, maybe we need one extra slide. And you tell it, hey, give me an extra slide. So it's really intentionality becoming a product that's sharp. It's a sharp tool to close your sale. As opposed to before, you had to work on this sharp tool for many days with many teams. So it's really a new way. So think about how different that is, how different that process is of, I wanted to create this presentation tool to sell my product to this client, right? A presentation is kind of like creating a custom tool for the moment. So that
Mm-hmm.
tool took days and teams and hours and skills. And now this tool is kind of 3D printed for you. You just have to be very clear about what the tool should be doing and give it enough of the material so the 3D printing can complete in an abstract way, of course, I'm speaking. I think that's just a kind of a tiny example of the transformation that we're witnessing in the technology space.
Oh, I totally agree. And coming from consulting background, I know that those were some of the most painful moments when you had to visualize a PowerPoint presentation for customer success. And what a change that has brought into the productivity. I would say what we did in 2 days or 3 days is done in 3 hours now. And that is where the value really is. So let me ask you one thing. Are the CEOs or the C-suite, are they confusing AI adoption with AI value?
Based on what I see happening in industry, I think that the core problem is that they don't think about AI adoption in that more humane way, where it's like if you brought a new team in the org, they have to get to know the team, that your people have to learn to work with this new team, and this team has to learn to work with your people. And of course, that's what adoption looks like. It's different than old tech, but that's what adoption looks like for I don't know if they're confusing AI adoption with AI value. I think maybe they're underrating the complexity of AI adoption and the new flavor of AI adoption, of adoption that AI requires. I'll phrase it like that. The new flavor of adoption that AI requires. It's a different kind of adoption than with legacy software tools.
Okay. So, and where do you think the C-suite underestimates the AI, adoption of AI? Where do you see the implementation, or what is the fear amongst the enterprise wire or the misconceptions around adoption of AI?
I think when you talk about in broad terms, you can say things like AI brings risk, and what if AI can access things it's not supposed to access, and what if it can modify things it's not supposed to modify? And those are all very fair concerns. Like you should have those concerns. But those concerns apply to a certain range of a certain kind of AI product. And yeah, they're so agentic being one of them. So if you're bringing in an agent, an AI agent into your environment, by definition, an agent is something that can be proactive and take its own decisions and decide its own steps. You have to be very careful about what is the access framework for that agent. And for that, yeah, you have to be very concerned. But there's so much more AI out there that's much more constrained and localized that will could never touch anything, could never reach out to anything, could never read anything. And I think there's a different level of concern for that AI. I'm going to share this on this podcast with you today. I've never said this out loud outside of me talking to a friend this week, but I thought it was an interesting idea. We're talking about this area. And I said that agentic AI, especially as it evolves and gets more advanced, is a little bit like having a pet. You can have a hamster, and there's certain things you have to be careful about with a hamster, or you can have a dog, or you can have a lion, right? So when we talk about like AI adoption, it's like, okay, do you want a pet? But what kind of pet? And if you bring in a lion, yeah, you have to be very careful with a lion. Absolutely, 100%. Like, I'm never gonna be like, yeah, get a lion, drop him in, put him in your bedroom, great, like, love it. No, like, be super careful, know what you're doing if it's a lion. But if it's a hamster, it's still AI. It still does AI things, but it's a whole other range of concerns. And what's interesting is, or maybe what's complicating the current environment is that we don't have that gradation. We don't have anything that you can point and say, that's a hamster, that's a dog, and that's a lion. We don't have that vocabulary. Forget about having those systems and technologies that allow us to do that. We don't even have that vocabulary of classification. And we don't even have this idea to think about it in that way. Yeah, this is how early we are in the curve. My expectation is as we move forward, we'll develop the right language, we'll develop the right maturity frameworks, risk frameworks that will start to identify these things, and you'll be able to classify, okay, this AI enabled product is, hamster class, and this AI enabled product is elephant class. And there's completely different considerations when you're thinking about bringing a hamster or an elephant into your enterprise.
Oh, I like it. I think that's where responsible AI implementation kind of comes in. And if you want to talk about responsible AI and how does the enterprise really balances out the human side and the adoption side while maintaining that governance layer.
We're in for a fun ride. I think it's going to be phenomenal, but today everyone is doing it a little bit differently because everyone is figuring out for the first time. And some enterprises do a little bit of a better job. Some enterprises do a little bit of a worse job. And not just enterprises, regular companies too, same deal. Because they're all kind of figuring out for the first time. I think in a few years we'll have more of a normal way to do it. I think very similar to, if you remember, like a quarter century ago, I can say that now, where we had like enterprise Java beans and that kind of stuff, like back in the day with enterprise Java. That was, a similar situation where companies were like figuring out, does this make sense? Like, how do we think about this? How do we do this? And they were kind of trying different things, different frameworks. There was WebSphere and all these kinds of things. But that was new and it took a few years to figure out also.
Right. I've got a question, but is that a lot more riskier with AI than it was with Java Bean?
100%, of course. It's a much more volatile technology than EJBs were.
So, how do you prevent AI from turning messy human nuance into false certainty?
That has to be a part of your requirement as you're developing your solution. So that has to be one of your targets. So you can't turn a blind eye. It's a complex problem because depending on the family of model you use, depending on even the quantization of that model, or if you're additionally training that model, depending on the harness you're using with that model, and then additionally, depending on the context you're feeding that model, it's going to have different behavior. And so you have to take all of those factors into account when you're making sure that your model doesn't bullshit you. You're grounding into real data, real outcomes, and not, no false anything. The frontier providers are starting to focus on this. You've seen some news from Anthropic on how it's starting to be less sycophantic. I'm sure similar things will follow from OpenAI, because historically they were happy to tell you, yeah, you're right, no matter what you say. And the scary thing is they were very good at finding reasons for why you're right. So not only is it going to tell you you're right, but it's going to convince you with like really good logic for why, whether you are or not. So I think that's just something that wasn't paid attention to in early model development. Like that wasn't a focus. Like don't be sycophantic. Just never came up as a priority. And I think now that the models are of a certain level of maturity and intelligence and quality of output, now that they don't really hallucinate as often, I'm not saying they don't, but not as often. Now this is the next frontier. Don't be a sycophant. Give us the objective. Don't just tell us we're right. But the models are getting better, but you have to, as you build your solution, that has to be a part of how you build it. It has to be a part of how you test. So for example, the way we did it at Assembly is, so we're basing things off of meetings. And if you're getting some fake answer that didn't actually happen in the meeting, that's a big problem. That was always a dimension that was built in, where when our models would respond, we would always make sure that they don't try to fill in the gaps if they don't know, and they're always explicit about, I need additional information. So that was a priority for us. When our product would respond, if it didn't know something, we'd say, I need more details about this, I can't answer. And the second thing we did, of course, is to ground the answer. So for example, when Assembly today responds with a document or anything like that, it will always include references to where it got those details from, like your actual meetings, where it got the information from.
That's awesome. So let's talk about, there is a lot of noise about human in the loop, right? And how relevant is that? How relevant is that missing layer between the AI and the business value? How critical is humans, and how critical will they be continue to as part of this conversation?
Today, very critical because as smart as the models are and as good as the harnesses are, they're still very flawed. And for anything that touches important business elements, I'm not even saying critical, important business elements, you need a human in the loop to make sure nothing crazy is going on. Whether that's, to approve certain changes, to approve certain updates, even internal materials, of course, to approve any kind of sharing outside with customer facing materials. You still need people to have an eye on what's actually going on, and also people to really participate in this process of creation, because there's this concept when you're working with agents of steering. So this idea that an agent is working, but again, it's like a pet, right? It's like a horse, but you want to steer the horse. And today, steering is still very important. The horse is still not as smart as we'd like it to be. It still does weird things. It gets spooked, just like a real horse. It gets spooked, and then it runs off in a crazy direction. You need a person in the room to make sure that doesn't happen. My prediction is that that type of steering is going to become less and less important for a greater and greater number of tasks. There always will be a layer of tasks, whether it's in medical or in legal. There's going to be a great range where you always need a human. You'll always need a human because even a tiny percent of error is a huge ramification. So there are certain areas where you'll always need human steering no matter what. But there are many areas where human steering will become less and less important because we'll be able to trust the AI to do better and better, more and more consistently. A good analogy for this is the airplane autopilot. So, originally the pilot had to pull switches, push buttons. There was a third person in the cabin who had 200 dials in front of them, and that was the flight engineer who had to continuously monitor and pull and push, like literally dozens and dozens of switches. But as the industry progressed, autopilot became better. Boeing was already a lot smoother, and there's a lot less mechanical work that required. And then Airbus came on, and they call Airbus a laptop with wings. That's what the pilots call it because it's so automated. It's very digital. You kind of set it and forget it in a sense. Today, you still need pilots in the cabin. They're very actively involved in critical phases of flight, like takeoff and landing and taxiing. They're also involved in critical phases of flight when things don't go as expected, like weather events and maybe something on board. Maybe there's an equipment failure or whatever it is, right? But on the normal conditions, especially on the Airbus airplanes, as far as I understand, the computer does a really nice job. And I think you can see that curve progressing, and I think a similar curve will be true of most information-bound work that AI starts to do.
So, Artem, based on this, I want to ask you a question. Like, what should AI never decide by itself?
Today, there are many things. Like, don't let your AI manage your credits. That's a fundamental. Like, it's going to empty out your bank account for some reason it thinks is a great idea. Anything that involves, human life where there isn't a human present to control it. For example, the auto driving Teslas, you still have a person behind the wheel that can take over, that hopefully will see something ahead, and can react in a good amount of time. But anything that involves like medicine, financial, I think legal also, although to a lesser extent these days, but still legal. Today, AI should never decide on its own. And I'm just hitting the majors. I would even say anything that goes out to your customers, AI shouldn't decide on its own. You should have a human review, at least like a cursory review. So those are things that I wouldn't let AI decide. Hiring and firing people, AI should not decide on its own. But everything I'm saying now has caveats. Like I'm sure there's like certain very specialized use cases where the AI could do a good job, but it's not like broadly, right? But broadly, hiring, firing, financial, medical, legal, outbound, customer facing, you have to be very, very careful today. Fast forward 5, 10 years, I think some of that will change.
How do you design AI systems so people feel more supported rather than surveilled? Because I was reading a International Labor Organization document which talked about cognitive decline, the level of stress that people are feeling with adoption of AI in enterprise. 53% of the people thought that they were being surveilled and rather than supported. How do you design a system where people don't feel stressed out about that?
Ironically, I think that element comes not from technology, but from company and culture. A note taker in one company is a huge productivity tool that everyone loves and can't live without and would never want to give up. The same note taker in another company is a tool that's being used to spy on me during my meetings and make me uncomfortable because, oh my God, what if I'm going to say the wrong thing? And it's the same tool in two different companies. I think a lot of it is about what's the intent of the leadership. Does the leadership engender trust about their intent? Do their people feel comfortable and supported and understand that their success and their growth and their contribution to the company is the priority, not how many mouse movements they made in an hour? I'm always amazed about this Microsoft Teams thing that a lot of large companies implemented, where they're looking for, like, have you moved your mouse or not in the past hour, and have you hit your keyboard or not in the past hour? That's such a horrible culture statement to your organization. It's very, to me, it's sad that something like that could pass in mass. Like, because if you want your people to really be disenfranchised with their brand and their culture, this is what you do. You basically make it clear that it doesn't matter what their contribution is. What matters is how often you move your mouse and whether you're staying in front of your computer. It's very sad. I think that's kind of how you break organizations. And you know what they say? It's like you end up being what you measure. So they say you can't manage what you can't measure, but the next thing beyond that is what you measure is what you become. That's the next kind of allegory. That's book two. The first book is you
The
you
book.
can't manage what you measure. The book two that hasn't been written is you become what you measure.
So you're saying AI should not become a replacement worker, or it should be more of a context aware collaborator to enhance the confidence of the employee or the workers or an enterprise.
It's a new kind of a resource, human adjacent. Can we carefully say that? Careful to call it software. It's not really. It's certainly not human, but it's a human adjacent technology, but it's a new kind of thing that goes into your environment and does really valuable things for your business. It's not about, like, it's not the same as a human. You can't replace a human with something that's not the same as a human. So it's naturally an augmentation of your company. It will have reverberations into your human workforce, of course. It's going to change what the skill sets, the what kind of skill sets are important. Certain skills around collaborating with these new AI technologies in your environment are going to become more important, similarly to how using a word processor became important 30 years ago, whereas before, maybe, or 40 years ago, whereas before it wasn't that important. It's the same idea. So it's going to have reverberations into your workforce, but it's not a replacement concept, right? It's almost like, if you add salt to a soup, it doesn't replace the pepper. I don't know if that's a great analogy, but but it's more like that, right? It changes the flavor profile, and then maybe you need a, different kind of pepper now because you added this thing, but it makes the soup overall richer. But that's how I look at it. It's more of a transformative element rather than a replacement element, because it's a different thing. It doesn't work like humans work in many ways. We still have certain things that we do that we're really good at that AI will have a long time catching up on.
That's a great statement. You change the flavor, you're going to get a different recipe because that's how AI is. It's very context aware. So let me ask you one thing. When is DIY AI good enough and when does it break? Because that's where the differentiation of understanding whether I put pepper or I put salt, because the outcome is going to be very different. When is the DIY AI is good enough? And where is the risk?
Personal use, I think DIY AI is fantastic and you should run out and go use it right away. There's phenomenal models out there today. So when we first spoke, I talked about GLM 5.1. Now we have GLM 5.2. Somebody listened to that conversation. Now we have GLM 5.2. It's phenomenal. It's really strong. It's priced at, I think, 1/6 or something, 1/5 of what Opus is priced at, with almost equal firepower. It's really impressive. And for your home projects, you should be doing cool things at home because like you now can. And it's very affordable. Okay. So that's for personal use. In terms of in companies, DIY AI is great if you have certain narrow tooling use cases. Like there's a certain process that's very well defined and you can like easily automate it with a little bit of AI. Great, do it. Awesome, phenomenal. And you should be doing that. There's a little bit of that. When it comes to anything that's not like a turnkey little thing that you're doing, DIY can quickly bite you in the butt, of course, because you're not gonna sit there and think about all the ways that it can go wrong, right? If it's running in this little isolated thing, okay, so one workflow will get wrong, you notice that and you'll fix it, but it saved you 999 other workflows, so you're still happy. But in the real business environment, when you're operating at scale and it has to do something well many thousands of times, maybe in a day or a week, this is where professional solutions come in, because this is where the risks multiply. So DIY is great, but when you're starting to operate at scale, especially for things that are mission critical for your business or just important and valuable for your business, DIY starts to falter. The other thing to remember is, okay, if it's like a little solution, if this process changes slightly, you can change the little solution slightly and you're fine, and the DIY thing continues to work. But if your process changes significantly, you will need to stand up a shadow organization just to manage and maintain this AI solution. So it comes back to the same question of like, well, do you want to write a word processor internally or do you want to use Microsoft Word? Do you want to build your own tax software on top of Excel, or do you want to buy QuickBooks from Intuit? There are certain levels of complexity and scale where it's just price efficient and time efficient to purchase from a provider who's focused on solving that problem day in and day out. So I think it's a question of criticality and the question of scale. And of course, there's many small opportunities for DIY that are great, but I think once you're starting to think scale, you need to look at real products. Because, for example, like think about what a CRM is, right? Like very simple. It takes a contact, a name, and an email, and done, right? And you put when was the last time you talked to them? It sounds like you can code that in 3 days. But there's Salesforce out there and HubSpot out there, and those companies are doing really well and they're making billions, and somehow they're providing value. For some reason, nobody is waking up and saying, I'm going to go and code my own Salesforce. It's a scale of solution question.
Oh, absolutely. I think you talked about financial outcomes, right? Or you can manage your finances using Excel, but at some point you need a good accounting software. Similarly, you can use a general LLM for your meeting summaries, but at some point you're going to have to need that structured workflow, the governance, the memory, the integration, and the accountability, because you don't want a tool that's going to run a rogue on you. And that's a big risk, right? That a lot of people don't understand. Let's talk about Monday morning, the CEO's meeting. For leaders listening to this podcast and they want human and AI to work better together, what is the first workflow that they should examine starting next week?
I'm thinking the layup answer, and I'm not going to give this answer, but the layup answer is in technology development because AI is very, very strong there today. But let's look at some of the business teams. Probably the first workflow I would look at is how you do your support. I think that's the lowest hanging fruit. There's a lot of really good AI powered things there that provide immediate benefit at scale with very low downside. We've been very successful in implementing AI in our customer support. And the reason it works well is because there's a lot of repetition in that world. And there's a lot of good base of what a correct answer is. So it's kind of like a very naturally well-suited system for like pretty simple AI to do a good job in.
I've got one last question. How critical is governance for adoption of AI enterprise-wide?
Must have, right? Of course, must have. You have to have governance. You have to know, especially for AI. I think more important for AI than even for classic technology, because the kinds of decisions that AI can undertake on its own without, if you don't control it, are much more pervasive than classical tech. Like it's a lot less predictable. I would even say it's a priority. So in classic software and legacy software, the requirements were the priority and then the governance came. But I think in modern IT and intention technology, governance is priority, because when you're talking about agentic, the most important thing is the guardrails that you set for it, the framing that you give it in terms of what it can and cannot do, and how do you ensure that it doesn't do those things. That's the most important thing, because everything in the middle, it kind of figures out on its own. So you don't have to specify requirements, right? It's kind of generally intelligent in some ways, but you absolutely have to specify the borders of its operation. And that's the most important thing to do. So I think when it comes to governance, especially for agentic tech, it's a higher priority than the requirements themselves.
With that, Artem, thank you so much. This was a brilliant conversation. We really appreciate it. I look forward to your second book, and hopefully we'll see the success of Assembly, because it's obviously focuses on the most overlooked sources of enterprise value, the everyday conversations. You turn them into more decisions with risk and commitment and customer intent, all kind of combined together. Thank you again, Artem, for being on our podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. Really love the conversation. I encourage everyone to check us out at www.sembly.ai, sembly.ai. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Today's core blueprint is clear. True agentic value is not achieved by simply deploying autonomous code. It requires shifting your paradigm from legacy information systems to proactive intent technology. To protect your enterprise from the friction of unguided autonomy and ensure your tools support your workforce rather than surveil them, leadership must stop managing AI as a traditional software asset and start integrating it as a human-adjacent collaborator. A special thanks to Artem Koren for sharing his deep technical, psychological, and conversational intelligence insights with us today. At Kategos, we help enterprises bridge the gap between technological potential and actual strategic impact. We don't just build AI models, we design the organizational structures and team frameworks required to run them safely. If you are ready to move your organization past superficial note-taking and transition into high-impact, intent-driven execution, visit us at www.kategos.ai to explore our latest white papers and framework strategies. I'm your host, and this has been the Kategos Deep Dive. Until next time, step out of the engine room, set your cultural guardrails, and start driving real value.